Thank you for joining the Career Foundation's Future at Work podcast and webinar series. This week, you're listening to our Empowering Ability segment, which features topics like accessibility in the workplace, mental health and well-being, job search advice for persons with disabilities, and inclusion and diversity tips for employers. My name is Frank Bufano, job developer and outreach worker for the Empowering Abilities program. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the deaf, deaf and hard of hearing community, accommodations, and employment. We have a very special guest with us, Patrick Cross, professor and program coordinator for Mohawk College's Deaf Empowerment Program. Welcome, Patrick, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join this with you today.
All right, so let's get things started. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and how you became an advocate for the deaf, and hard of hearing community?
Sure. I've been working here at Mohawk College, an academic upgrading deaf empowerment program for 21 years. And in the past 4 years, I have been the program coordinator as well. So how did this all begin? I think it started some time ago. My involvement in the deaf community, was around 21 university years. I grew up speaking. I was an oral deaf person. I became immersed in the deaf community, and I noticed language deprivation. Many deaf people did not have the same opportunities. And I think that people who can hear have opportunities that they take for granted that are not accessible to the deaf community. And as I started teaching, I noticed something common about my students. They just didn't have those same opportunities as other hearing individuals do. And they didn't have the same opportunity to become successful. There was an imbalance there.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Patrick. As a member of the deaf community, can you explain to the listeners what is deaf culture and what makes it unique?
Sure. So the word deaf really has two different meanings, very different meanings. For most people, they see the word deaf and it's not capitalized, and they think of it from a medical perspective. It's a person who can't hear, that hearing needs to be fixed, that person needs help, and so forth. But the other meaning to deaf is to capitalize deaf, capital D-E-A-F. And the deaf community has taken ownership of that word. It's our identity. It is our culture. We don't see ourselves as disabled. We see ourselves through our own way of life. We are a linguistic and cultural minority, and that's our view towards ourselves. We have a history, heritage, identity, values, and the primary way of communication is through sign language. A lot of people think that ASL, American Sign Language, that itself is just, taken from English and you throw some signs on top of English words, but it is not. It is not the same as English. It is a distinct, separate language, legitimate language with its own grammar, with its own syntax and other linguistic structures. Also, some people call deaf people hearing impaired. They will use that term. From our view, it's a very offensive term because it's impaired sounds like something is broken, it's damaged, it's less than. So we use and prefer the term deaf and just deaf alone. And people outside of the community, maybe they view deaf individuals as being less than, and they are more likely to use the term hearing impaired. So yeah, that's what makes the culture distinct and unique.
I think that's really great for our listeners to know. So Patrick, how did you become involved in the Deaf Empowerment Program at Mohawk College?
So 21 years ago, I began. At that time, there were 2 teachers working in the Deaf Empowerment Program, and they found that they needed someone as a backup when others were pulled away for other work needs, someone was sick, so I came in as a substitute. I had taught before, I met their needs, and I was hired. The first year I worked maybe once a week as a supply whenever the need arose. And, I volunteered my time. I was there as well. A year later, one of the individuals left the program, one of the instructors. And so I was hired on full time and have been there since.
That's wonderful. So who is eligible and what do students learn while in the program?
Sure. Well, our program is open to deaf, deafened, and hard of hearing adults. We teach through ASL. There's no speech, there's no other language. The primary language of instruction is ASL, because we believe that the students can identify with our experiences. We can be role models as they navigate some challenges. We found many of the students in our program come to us as a bridge between high school graduation and then on their way to college or employment. So, they have graduated high school and learning using ASL, but there may be some gaps in their English in terms of their preparation or ability to enter college or employment fully. So we become the bridge to that. We have 2 pathways in our program. One is academic, and that's for students whose goal is to enter college. And the other pathway is employment. So students who are not interested in college but want to focus on employment skills. That's the pathway we provide. We teach communication, grammar, reading, writing, developing essays, communicating through the use of memos, those kinds of things. We also teach numeracy, and that can vary, whatever the needs are for a particular college program or their employment. We also provide employment skills, such as job readiness, career planning. So we teach those skills as well to move the student forward to success.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Patrick. Switching gears here, what would you say are some of the biggest barriers for members of the deaf and hard of hearing community when it comes to finding employment?
That's a really good question. It's very hard to pinpoint specific reasons because I think there's a number of things happening. For example, communication. Communication can be a barrier. So what happens is the deaf person and their communication is not the barrier. It's quite often from the employer who is taken aback and doesn't know what to do when they're faced with a deaf person. How am I going to communicate with them? They may be nervous. They may have some anxiety. Well, how am I going to communicate with this deaf person? So also there are a lot of incorrect assumptions, some misconceptions around deaf people. So I'll give you one example. Many employers assume that it will be expensive to hire a deaf person because they will require a lot of accommodations, and that could be costly. When in reality is 58% of all of the accommodations required don't cost a penny. There's no cost associated with them. There's just some accommodations that require some changes. And also accommodations could be about a $500 cost. Well, that comes in at the same price as a special chair to support someone's back. That may be the same cost spent on putting in a desk that's a sit-stand desk for workers to stand while they're working. So, but unfortunately, the misconception is, oh, I think those accommodations will be very costly. That's what employers are thinking. In terms of job accommodations, there was a study done in January 99 of $1 invested for a deaf person. The investment on the return is $40. So clearly there's benefits, cost benefits.
Absolutely. So what do you think can be done to remove some of the barriers? There's two approaches that you can take in overcoming the barriers. One is 2 years ago, we set up a committee brainstorming ways and ideas to break down those barriers. A Hamilton hub. We wanted to set up a hub of information, central and available to employers and people who are looking for employment. So there would be information, resources, whatever is needed to prepare for interviews or to make those connections. And also it would benefit employers because there would be a number of resources available, tips, suggestions, ideas where to find information. Unfortunately, COVID put a temporary hold on that priority. Hopefully, as things, as they say, go back to normal, that hub will be developed. And I think that it would really benefit a lot of the employers, for them to have a lot of information available to them. I think it would reduce some of their nervousness, their anxiety around hiring deaf people. Then the other possible approach is my team here at Deaf Empowerment Program, where we are the experts and we know how to present and provide information on how to break down barriers, provide simulation exercises. And the presentation is called Demystifying Deafness. That helps people increase their understanding, to understand why they may be experiencing some resistance and how to remove that resistance. And so we can come out to other groups and peoples and provide that workshop. I'm happy to come and present to your organization, any organization that has need. That's wonderful. Thank you. To those employers who might be worried about hiring members of the disability community due to inadvertently saying or doing the wrong thing, how would you alleviate their fears?
The best way is to access information, resources, for example, the hub that I just mentioned. That would provide the kinds of information on how to conduct yourself in an appropriate, non-offensive manner. But really, the best way, ask your employee, how do you identify yourself? What term do you use? And that's true for any disability, whether a person is blind, in a wheelchair. Ask the person themselves, how would you deal with this? That's really the best way. Also, I remember more recently, there were some comments, or more recently, my comments about hearing impaired, that, people are well-intentioned, but in their life experience, they grow up, they think that that's the proper term, they think that the person is less than, or it's this very paternalistic view. And often people, when they see that term disability, well, the prefix dis means there's something wrong with the abilities. And what we need to do is we have to look at the person first, not their disability. Again, ask the person. They'll provide the answer to your question.
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to approach it. So now, what are some of the advantages to hiring someone who is deaf or hard of hearing?
To answer that question, I have to respond with, how much time do you have? We could spend all day talking about this. So what I'll do is I'll highlight some of the benefits, the important benefits. Deaf people are very highly visual, alert people, have a visual acuity, which means attention to detail. Unfortunately, people who can hear are often distracted by the noises in their background. But deaf people use their eyes consistently, and they're great at catching details. If you have a business that's willing to support and invest in deaf staff, there's a less turnover. Deaf people tend to stay with an employer for a longer period of time. Their attendance is better than those that can hear. And as I mentioned before, they're highly visual and adaptive people. So they can provide support in problem solving. Also, when you hire deaf people, you're providing more diversity in your workplace. People come from different backgrounds, different skills, different abilities, and overall, there's benefit in everyone learning and becoming more open-minded, being in a diverse work environment. Also, deaf people have a high ability to problem solve, to identify gaps, especially around communication, because they've spent their whole life learning to overcome. And so they've become experts, communication experts. So they will find a way to solve communication barriers. Maybe there's some awkward that first day, and then, time passes and everyone becomes used to the situation. Another benefit is a different perspective. Maybe a business owner doesn't realize that deaf people, through their experience, see things differently. They may offer some new marketing ideas that someone else would never think of, but it's through their life experience that they've developed a different view, a way of a different perspective. And then finally, most importantly, I feel, they have better safety records. On average, there's two different studies. The first study showed that deaf and hard of hearing workers have a 98% safety record. If you look at any group of people in their safety record, they are in the top category. Again, it's that reliance on the eyes, that visual acuity, that visual perception, the ability to pay attention to detail. The other study around safety was done on truck drivers, van drivers, long haul, and deaf and hard of hearing drivers have better driving records. Again, that relates to that visual acuity. Drivers in vehicles often have their have music on and they're less attentive. So better driving records.
Thank you so much for sharing that information with us, Patrick. That's about all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank Patrick, my guest Patrick, for taking the time to educate us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join. And I hope that the information I've shared offers some new ideas, some new perspectives for those who are watching. And absolutely, any doubts, please do reach out, contact me. I can provide more information, ideas, tips, whatever you may need. And I appreciate your time for listening today.
Thank you, Patrick. We appreciate your time as well.
Great.
I just wanted to note that the Career Foundation's Empowering Abilities program can support members of the deaf and hard of hearing community in finding and keeping employment by providing job placements, one-on-one individual training. We can provide industry-specific training and funding for workplace accommodations such as ASL interpreters and software to help with the success of our clients. We can also support inclusive employers in finding and keeping new talent by providing job coaching, on-the-job training, and wage subsidy to offset the cost of training over a span of 12 weeks. The Empowering Abilities program is a government-funded employment program aimed at helping connect employers to job-ready candidates for their business. Our experienced staff help pre-screen, pre-select, and assist with the retention of new employees with barriers. Please check out our website at careerfoundation.com/EAP for more information. Thank you again for joining the Career Foundation's Future at Work podcast and webinar series. Be sure to visit us online at careerfoundation.com and connect with our Empowering Abilities team on Instagram by following at thecareerfnd.eap. That's at thecareerfnd.eap. You can also search for the Career Foundation's Future at Work podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Until next time, this has been the Future at Work podcast. Have a great day, everyone.